Welcome to Off the Shelf. My name is Yvonne Wolf. I'm here with Charles Loebbaka, a local resident since 1964. He's also been a former Board of Trustee member of the Glenview Village. Charles, tell us more about yourself.
Well, I moved to Glenview in 1964. I was editor of the Glenview Announcements at that time. After about a year, we decided to move to Glenview. So we moved here and had 3 sons who grew up here, and I'm still here. One son is still here, and one is in Arizona and one is in California. So I travel west often to see the grandchildren and the family.
So you started with the Glenview...
I started with the Glenview Announcements. In 1963. And at that point, there was the actual Glenview office for the Hollister papers. They had an office on Glenview Road across from the former fire station. And my job was to cover, amazingly, the entire village. The village board, the planning commission, the zoning board, the school board, police and fire, everything. Okay. So you really got to know the village, okay? And I think that sort of sparked my interest in village government. And then some years later, let's go ahead now forward to 1973, the village the village president there was an opening on the board. Someone was retiring. So he asked me to serve 2 years of that unexpired term. And then I served 2 4-year terms after that, so for a total of 10 altogether. And I enjoyed being on the village board. It was 10 years, and I thought it was time to move on. There's so much time you should give, and then others should have a chance. So I went from there, and that, of course, was part-time, mostly evenings, weekend meetings, budget hearings, and that sort of thing. And I eventually became editor of the Evanston Review, and then eventually editor of the North Shore papers, the entire chain of the Hollister papers, which date back a long time. So I stayed at Hollister for several years, took 2 brief breaks. In 1968, I was campaign manager for Bill Scott, who was running for Attorney General. In 1972, I worked for Governor Ogilvie as his campaign press secretary when he was running for re-election. Scott won, Ogilvie didn't. I went back to the newspapers and stayed there until 1982, roughly, and I joined Northwestern as Director of Media Relations.
Well, we're here to talk about your 3rd book about Jack Lamont, Love and Death in Paris. Chuck, Love and Death in Paris is the 3rd book you've written about Private Eye Jack Lamont. Now, can you tell us a little bit about how you started working on this book?
I started working probably unknown to me at the time, back in 2007. My middle son, my 2nd son, had been transferred to Paris for 2 years. So I visited him and his family in Paris in 2007 and 2008. So I soaked up the culture. I mean, it's a spectacular city. They showed me the sights, and I traveled in the metro by myself and just, wandered around the streets and the neighborhoods. Notre Dame, the Sacré-Cœur Basilica, the Louvre, went through there. Anyway, beautiful place. And I wound up spending a couple afternoons in Marais, which is the Jewish section of Paris. At that time, not really knowing about the history of the Jewish people there, but eventually that became part of this book. So I think the visit there started the thought process, but I really hadn't fixed on really writing a book, but I think probably in the background of my head there was a sense of a story there. Then I read Sarah's Key, about the little girl who's been part of the occupation when the Germans occupied Paris. And I used it as a springboard to research more about what happened, and that led me to Drancy, which was the detention camp in Paris, just outside Paris, where the French police would round up mostly Jewish people, and they were detained there. And so, a horrific story, fascinating at the same time, and that became a key part of this book, Love and Death in Paris.
Well, it's such a different style from the other two Jack LaMont stories. The Jack LaMont stories, the other two are written in first person. He is telling you about his detective work. In this one, you chose the third person. Is there a reason why?
The first two books, detective mysteries, were, I'd always loved crime noir stories and film noir movies back in the 40s and 50s, so that was always my interest. And I thought I could maybe write that. You know, Sam Spade and Philip Marlowe, people like that. But so I gave that a try. But then my interest, as I said, really turned to France, roughly about probably 2009. And that was when I retired from Northwestern University, had more time to do research. And I began taking books out of the library, looking at historical websites, reading books, watching films that took place during that era.
You mentioned that this is more of a historical fiction.
This would be historical fiction,
Yes.
right. There's fact in it, but the story itself and the characters, most of them are made up. They're fictional.
But they're part of that historic moment of
Yes.
the French Resistance. And I guess you can tell us a little bit about the writing process and what did you enjoy the most about the writing process of this book?
Well, there's probably two parts to that. The research is fascinating. It's like taking a history lesson. I mean, if I was at a cocktail party, I could have all kinds of stories about what happened back then. I'm not sure anybody's interested at this point in old history, but it was a learning process. And again, these are things that happened that I never knew growing up. We weren't taught in school. And in fact, much of what the French did in collaborating with the Germans was really not recognized by the French. They ignored it. They buried it for years and years and years. So it was really only until fairly recent past that people began to dig into this and things were published, records were finally released. Mm-hmm. So the full story is pretty much unfolded at this point as to what happened then. So I'm looking back, but I'm setting my characters into the situation that existed during those years. Basically, the book is basically 1938 to 1943.
In a way, you're celebrating those people who resisted. And instead of, no, we mostly hear about, the Germans came and they just let them occupy them.
Yes, the protagonist, a character from my first book, is Jack LaMont. He is a young newspaper reporter in the south suburbs of Chicago. His mentor, his guardian, his friend is head of a mob in the south suburbs, which I know something about, having worked there. And his friend, the Godfather, helps him get a job with the Tribune, was looking for someone to send a reporter with the photographer they're sending overseas to cover the pending war.
Right,
So
and he has an opportunity to travel for once to New York City, and he takes a train and arrives in Grand Central Station.
Right.
He picks up his luggage and meets his new boss, MJ, right? We didn't know it.
Millicent?
Yes.
Millicent Mueller, yes.
And minutes after they meet, they swiftly take off, right, to catch a boat.
Right.
This momentum, I love it. It's such a thrill. Did you plan this for an Indiana Jones episode? It seems ready for action movie.
Yeah. The ocean liners back then were floating luxury houses. I mean, they were amazing. The famous movie stars boarded those, took the boat across to Europe, and it was for the wealthy. But they were spectacular, and I don't think their generators broke down like they have recently.
But I think I've seen some movies from the 1930s, and that scene you set up, how they walk into the dining room, and Jack LaMont is though he's 22 in the beginning of the book, he's a boy. And she calls him that. She calls him Jackie Boy.
Yeah, right.
Because she lies her way to get a table.
She's worldly, no
yes,
question about
she
it.
is.
And attractive, yes. Very becoming.
How did you create that character?
I just made it up. I have no idea where she came from. I know no one like that, but she became one of my favorite characters.
Yes.
And they wind up in Paris, and it turns out to be the eve of Germany's invasion of Poland. at a gallery where Monet paintings are being displayed, Jack meets Katrine Boucher. She's an art history student in the Beaux-Arts School, half Jewish, her mother is Jewish, and she's boarding with that family, friends of her family in Paris, and they remain back in Strasbourg. So I have the two, with a brief meeting, attracted to each other, both
Yes.
attractive people, and then they go their separate ways. Jack and Millicent are off to Poland, Germany, before coming back to France, and Katrine, also known as Kiki, joins with her young friends and forms a resistance group in Paris.
Well, then they have each have their separate adventures until they meet again.
Right. These are parallel plots, which I discovered are not that easy to write. You've got people going here and people going there, but eventually they do get back together.
Right.
Again, a chance meeting in 1942. They're both in Paris and they meet. And then they became lovers and plan a future together.
Yes.
But they're both being hunted.
Right, right, and that's where the momentum keeps up. There, and I want to comment on your use of imagery. You have some very descriptive words to describe a tight dress. You said it was like honey on a spoon, and her hips walking briskly in a fitted dress like two cats doing the rumba.
Right.
And autumn sing with leaves swirling and tiptoed into the sky. They were just beautiful. Or do you also write some poetry?
No. No poetry. Well, the way to express this is a printed page. It's black on white, but the reader has to visualize.
Yeah.
So a metaphor, an analogy, conveys in a more emotional sense what you're reading in print. So vivid language, and they seem to fit those characters pretty well, so I use those descriptions for these two females.
Do you find that your work in editorial writing have helped you develop a writing style?
No, it's really completely different. My newspaper career and doing news releases for Northwestern were all basically your standard journalism. You know, ABC, 1, 2, 3, who, what, where, when.
Yeah.
The fiction writing is totally different because it's whatever you imagine. It really is. Fiction is fiction. It's all out of the head, and you're drawing on sometimes distant memories. Jack Lamont's newspaper career, I drew on some of what I knew or saw back when I began newspaper reporting. And the rest just comes from research and imagination, sometimes slowly, but it eventually comes out.
Yes, you say the first initial thought of this book probably started in 2008. So it took a good 4 years, would you say?
Right. I started researching the topic in general, and then when I retired from Northwestern in would have been September 2009, I had the time to devote more time to it, and lots of time being retired. So the way it was clear then to really focus on this and spend the time needed to do it, which is an extraordinary amount of time, no question about it.
Yes, I read Love and Death in Paris also as a coming-of-age story for Jack Lamont. His character in the beginning, when he meets MJ, he is this young boy, even though he hasn't been anywhere, right? He didn't know how to behave himself in a fancy restaurant. He's not from any privileged class. He's had to work, and he didn't really have a passion in life. In the end of the story, when MJ and he meet again, they somehow are the same age now.
Mm-hmm.
He sees her as more of an equal.
Right. Good point. I hadn't really thought of it that way, but yeah. I wanted young people, and in fact, Katrine has a childhood friend who's a young Jewish girl that she's staying with the family.
Right.
So there was this Jewish connection to some of this, and Jack totally not in that kind of an aspect. So you have the contrast of these two characters in different roles, different backgrounds, different dangers, as it turns out.
What was the most compelling story you read about the Jewish that were hiding from
Right.
from the German occupation? Because there was a lot of detail you went into the book about being half Jewish or being quarter Jewish, and what would that land you in the...
Right. Well, the research indicates there were good and bad French, good and bad Catholics. There were many Catholics who hid Jewish kids, including at convents. There were other people who took Jewish kids in outside of Paris at their farmhouses in the country. There were some Frenchmen who were resisting, not for a couple of years, but eventually they did. But the basic problem was the French government was collaborating with the Germans. The French government, working with the Germans, but really they implemented a major roundup of Jewish people throughout Paris. They were not only stateless people who had emigrated, hidden there, they were also native French citizens. And I was drawn to Drancy, which was this multi-building housing complex just outside Paris. And the roundups began, and the French police would come and arrest the Jewish people, take them in buses to Drancy. It was called a detention camp, and at that point, people didn't know where they were going from there or what would happen to them. Drancy was the building was built for about 700 people, and they jammed as many as 7,000 in there. So unthinkable living conditions. And to give you an idea of the broad scope of all this, Drancy was like the holding area for Germans to deport them to the death camps in Poland. And over this time period, from when Drancy started till they finally evacuated the place in 1944 when the Allies arrived, the Germans deported about 75,000 people just from Drancy alone.
Wow.
Just alone. And many of them came in from the south of France too, because eventually the Germans occupied not only the north part of France, but also the south part of France. So people were being shipped all the way up to Paris and then deported on state trains.
Did you visit Drancy?
No, I didn't know about it at the point.
Okay.
When I visited my son and family the first two times, I was just taking the culture. I really didn't know about Drancy until I read Sarah's Key, and then the idea germinated to see what really happened there.
Did you also go to Germany? Because you describe a lot of German food with such precision.
But I had a friend who was stationed there for a while, so
Okay.
drew on him a little bit. Like when you pick up information all over the place, I'm
Right.
often surprised what I stumbled across. Oh, that fits really good. Let me get back to Drancy for a moment.
Yeah.
The first roundup, first major roundup, I guess you would say, to Drancy was July 16 and 17, 1942. And there was debate. I get the sense that the Germans didn't want the kids sent there, but the French didn't want to separate the parents from the children. So the children wound up in Drancy. And the first rate 4,000 kids were there. And they all wound up going to the death camps. Wow. So striking and a true tragedy.
When you did the research, did you feel you have to tell this story because it was painful?
I had that feeling. Clearly, most people in America have little knowledge, if any, of these events in France. I didn't, and I think most people don't. Hopefully they will find them informative and interesting, even though it's told in a fictional style. But it's a part of history that really is not unlike what tends to happen some other places since then. So it's kind of a sign of other things that are not that different.
Have you met French people during your stay that you were that you could feel this history behind them was
Didn't really meet
yeah.
people other than the waiters at the cafes and the clerks and service people. They were all pleasant, by the way, contrary to the stereotype of French people. They're very polite. I didn't speak French except I could say poulet for chicken, maybe that was about it, or merci. But they're all very polite. So, but no real conversations with Frenchmen. My family, the twins, were at the American school, and their friends were mostly Americans who had been transferred to Paris also. So I didn't have a chance to mingle with, French people in person.
When you wrote these books, were you thinking that one day your grandchildren will read them? And
I am sending aside copies for them. Yes, I am. Thank you for asking. Yeah, there are three more. My youngest son, who still lives in Glenview.
mm-hmm.
They have two boys, and this oldest son, who's in Arizona, a granddaughter. Mm-hmm. So I'm about 22 to 11 is
oh
the
my
range.
goodness, what a range!
Right.
What a range. So, well, they're definitely reading age now, so they can enjoy the fruit of your work.
Yeah, and they may have an interest in writing too. You don't
mm-hmm.
know.
Yes.
I'm not sure where they're going to wind up, but they're all smart kids, they're intelligent, and they do read. Our kids read. They read a lot, and the grandchildren also do a lot of reading. So eventually, they'll read this. And maybe another book, too. I'm starting another book, so maybe another book.
Will it also be about Jack Lamont?
Yes, it is. Yes, Jack is, again, one of the protagonists. And the other protagonist is an 11-year-old Jewish girl who escaped the occupation out of Marais, wound up at a Catholic orphanage where Jack is hiding.
Was it hard being published, getting a publisher?
Well, there is an option for self-publishing. It's actually an Amazon subsidiary. It's called CreateSpace, createspace.com. And they will print your book, and you can order copies for yourself at a discount, but people can also buy books through them or through Amazon. So they have this service. It's sort of a branch of Amazon expanding into the mega bookseller of the world.
I see.
So I chose CreateSpace to publish my book, self-publish, and the way their system works is they don't print tons of copies. They print when someone orders.
Okay.
So it's print on demand, and it's self-publishing. To translate my manuscript into the actual physical book.
Right. Is it a PDF, a Word? What do you? Yeah.
It starts as just a Word document.
Okay.
I don't do PDFs or anything fancy. So I hired one of my colleagues at Northwestern, who was an editor in our publications office. He did the proofreading for me. And then I hired a graphic designer in our graphic design department at Northwestern, and she did the design of the entire book, all the pages, the line breaks and style, fonts, things like that. The cover was done by my wife's cousin, young man, very good graphic artist, excellent photographer. So he did the cover. There were different photos on front and back.
Yes.
And those I bought from a company called iStock, which it's called stock photos. Mm-hmm. You can buy them for certain uses, including book covers. So I bought the front cover, the girl on the bicycle, and the back cover, which actually is a scene of Montmartre. And so he designed that for me. Mm-hmm. But my Northwestern friend did the entire interior, making sure the page numbers were correct and everything looked nice, and it's turned to be a beautiful. That's a skill I don't have. So I really had to go outside to actually complete the process.
Oh, that's interesting to know there's a team behind.
Yes, actually,
actual
yeah.
production.
Yes, it would be. Yes, it would.
So you send your manuscript to Amazon, or is it go just digitally now?
The designer prepares a PDF for me.
Okay.
I email it to CreateSpace. Mm-hmm. They send back a proof. I get to review it. and then I sign off, and it's a book.
So when somebody purchases it, they'll get that that type of copy.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Approved copy.
I also made Love and Death in Paris into an e-book, so it's available by ebook too, also on Amazon.
Well, it is very interesting that it seems like it's much easier to have a book published now.
Yes, it is.
Right?
Anybody can publish a book.
Yes.
And millions of people are publishing books, which makes it hard to get recognized sometimes, but yes, right.
Yes, but it's still quite an accomplishment.
Yeah, well, yeah, looking forward to more of this.
Well, thank you, Chuck, for joining us. And thank you for joining us on Off the Shelf. My name is Yvonne Wolf. Please join us again on our next episode.